Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Book and Tonic Banter panel on Cosy Crime. I'm Debbie Young, and I'm very pleased to have with me Michelle Sauter and Trevor Williams, who writes as T.A. Williams. And we're going to be chatting about all things to do with Cosy Crime. But to kick off, we'll tell you a little bit about each of our most recent books and the next book that we have coming up to be published by Boldwood Books very soon. So, Trevor, would you like to kick off by telling us about your most recent book and your next book, please?
Of course, yeah. I'm writing at the moment a series of 6 books. They're all, I hope you can hear me. Apparently, I've got a bit of a crackly voice. I hope this is going to work. They're all set in Italy, which is a place I used to live in. And they're Cosy Crime. It's all about a retired ex-DCI from the Metropolitan Police who settles in Tuscany, adopts a dog, and people start getting killed, and he has to get involved. The most recent one, which came out just about a month ago, in fact exactly a month ago today, was Murder in Chianti. Chianti being just south of Florence. The famous wine, of course, comes from there. And in that one, there's a very, very nasty man who gets rather gruesomely murdered, in the best possible taste, you understand. And he's found dead on his own golf course, beaten to death with a golf club. The next one, which is coming out at the beginning of April, is Murder, if you'll pardon me as I just show you a little bit of, there we go, a bit of shameless advertising, is Murder in Florence, which is a city I used to live and work in.
Lovely.
And he's, can you hear me? Dan and his dog are traveling around, and they get engaged. He's just set himself up as a private investigator, and one of his first jobs is to help out a Hollywood film crew who are making a movie in Florence, and they start getting death threats. The weird thing is the death threats are delivered attached to arrows, as in bow and arrow, and so pretty soon he's there trying to sort that out. So those are the one that's just come out, the one that's coming out, and then his saga will continue with his 4-legged friend.
Fabulous. And so Murder in Florence is actually the third in that series, isn't it?
That's correct, yes. The very first one was Murder in Tuscany, which was the way it all started off. And now it's Murder in Chianti, Murder in Florence, and the one after will be Murder in Siena. So keep it local.
He gets around. Fantastic. I've read those first two and really enjoyed them, so I can't wait for Murder in Florence as well.
Thank you.
So, Michelle, would you like to tell us a little bit about Death at Crookham Hall, which is the first in this series, and then you've got Murder at Wardenmere Lake coming up very soon. So would you like to tell us a bit about those?
Yep, Death at Crookham Hall was published last month, and it's the first in the Iris Woodmore Mysteries series. It's set in 1920. Iris is a young woman. She's the daughter of a suffragette, and really she's the next generation of feminist. So we're very much in post-First World War Britain, and I wanted to set it in a realistic Britain rather than the 20s is typically depicted as the stylized world of the flapper girl. This is very much the reality of Britain, which was obviously a lot of unemployment post-First World War, and the suffragettes, who had been very radical prior to the war, then disbanded during the war and gave their attentions to the war efforts. And Iris's mother was very active in the suffragette movement, and she died in a suffragette protest in 1914. So Iris is quite a conflicted young woman, because on the one hand, she feels quite resentful to the suffragettes because of the loss of her mother, and she holds them responsible. On the other hand, you know, we're in this kind of very progressive new era, which isn't actually as progressive as she'd like it to be, because a lot of the gains made during the First World War, the gains for women were being lost after the war. So that's the sort of backdrop. And she becomes friends with Mrs. Siddons, who's standing for election to be a member of Parliament. Now, at that time, there were only 2 women MPs. So Mrs. Siddons is standing to be the 3rd women MP. And I thought it would be quite fun to actually have her standing against another woman, which would be a first in history to have two women standing against each other in the by-election. And Iris is firmly supporting Mrs. Siddons, and this kind of destroys her vision of a female victory over the all-male opposition when she's actually got two women competing against each other. And she goes to Houses of Parliament with Mrs. Siddons, but this is the place where her mother died in the suffragette protest. So she's sort of quite, conflicting emotions when she gets there. And when she's there, she finds out her mother died after falling into the Thames, but she finds out her mother didn't fall, she jumped. This sets her off on a trail trying to find out what happened. She tries to find the suffragettes that were with her mother on that day. And that's when she finds one of them has been missing for 6 years. And this takes her to Crookham Hall, where this suffragette was working as a maid. And from then on, she starts to uncover the secrets at Crookham Hall.
It's a fascinating era, isn't it? I've read quite a few books set in that immediate post-war period lately, and there's so many interesting themes. And the suffragettes are particularly interesting there, the politics and so forth. So from what I've read so far of the first one, it's absolutely gripping and really intriguing. So I suppose I better say a little bit about mine. So my most recent one is Murder Lost and Found, which is the 7th in the Sophie Sayers Cosy Mystery series, set in a little Cotswold village, very similar to where I live. This one came out earlier this month. Gosh, it's been a blur. A little bit earlier this month. And it's set in the village school immediately after the end of the summer term. And Sophie finds a dead body in the school lost property cupboard when they're clearing up after the end of term, which promptly disappears. So double mystery. She has to find the body and then find the murderer as well. So all good fun. And then the next one I haven't got to show yet, but Murder in the Highlands down there, that's coming out on the 15th of next month, up for pre-order. And whereas the first 7 in the series are set in a Cotswold village, very similar to the one that I live in, I've decided to send them off to different pastures new this time. So I'm sending Sophie and love interest Hector, who is the owner of the bookshop where she works in the village. She's taking him up to meet her parents in Inverness. And I love the Cotswolds. I've lived in the Cotswolds for over half my adult life, but I also love Scotland, and it's a double celebration really. So I've been celebrating the Cotswold community that I love in the first 7 books. The Murder in the Highlands starts and finishes in the Cotswolds, but in between it's up in Inverness and go to Loch Ness and to various other places in the Highlands, including some fabulous secondhand bookshop and all sorts of things, all sorts of danger pursuing them there, and another lovely mystery to solve. Now, we're all writing about cosy crime. Let's have a little chat about why we write about cosy crime, because we're obviously really hooked on it. Trevor, you've written lots of other kinds of things before, haven't you?
Yes.
So what made you make the leap, turn to crime, so to speak?
Yes, cosy crime. I think I made a comment on Facebook the other day. Basically, I hadn't realised that cosy crime existed as a genre. I mean, obviously one knows about crime, and to me, crime had always been. I think my favourite, we'll come on to this later, is Agatha Christie. I mean, there's a reason why she sold millions of books, but I hadn't realised that she was cosy, and so I googled it. When I first heard the word, can I just read you what it says?
Do.
It says, cosy crime is the gentlest subset of the broad genre of crime writing. It's a comfort read that leaves you satisfied and at one with the world, rather than scared to sleep alone with the lights out. And I think that's certainly in my stuff, what I'm trying to do is, you've got the mystery, there's, because it's a murder, there are dead bodies, but at the end of it, you don't want people to be sitting there chewing their fingernails and terrified to go to sleep.
Absolutely, it's a comfort read where virtue triumphs over evil, and just almost everybody lives happily ever after. One of my friends once referred to my books as rose-tinted murders, which I thought was quite a nice way of putting it. So there's not the sort that gives you nightmares. I'm very suggestible. I get nightmares terribly easily, so I don't want to give myself nightmares any more than any readers. So Michelle, what inspired you to start writing cozy crime?
Well, like Trevor, I was a big fan of Agatha Christie, reading all her novels at a young age. And like Trevor, I didn't really consider myself cozy crime. It's only recently that I've kind of, as he said, realised what that means, and what this whole sort of branch of the crime umbrella, how cozy crime fits into it. I think for me, it's the characters and the mystery. So rather than the focus on the gruesome details of a murder, I want to explore the characters. I've got a set of recurring characters that I hope people are going to engage with and relate to. So you're buying into the characters as well as the mystery. You're having the fun of going with the book and trying to guess who did it. I think cozy crime actually can touch on some gritty issues. I think whereas the murder may not be gritty, you can actually encompass quite a lot of issues, but the grit is in the social issues rather than perhaps the murder itself. Because I certainly touch on a few in my novels, issues that like domestic violence, rape, illegal abortions, because of the time period that the books are set in. So I think there is grit there, but not necessarily in the gruesome details of the murders.
Yes. Yeah, I think I always have sort of serious issues that are underlying the story and underlying the puzzle. So I address things like rural loneliness and isolation and various other things. And I think relationships are very important as well, whether they are romantic relationships or family relationships. Building relationships, I think, is very important in cozy crime. That's part of the fun. And I think we've all got lovely settings. I quite often have people saying to me, "Oh, I'd like to move to Wenderbury Barrow," which is the little village that my stories are set in. And I mean, I live somewhere quite like that already, really. But I think that you almost have the setting as almost another character. And I think in both of your books you do as well. You are looking forward to reading them because of the setting and because of the various settings of the stories.
Can I just go back and answer your original question before we move on? You asked why cozy crime, and the answer from my point of view was, to be honest, it was sort of a palate cleanser, really, because I've been writing for the last 10 years. I've been writing romance, and I've written I've lost count, 25 or 26 romances, and I just thought, I want to do something different. And I was okay with my deadlines for the romances. And I thought, well, I'll just have a go at something completely different. And I loved it. And from the moment I started writing this kind of thing, not least because for once I'm writing as a man, whereas all my other books have been writing through the eyes of a woman. And secondly, it's first person. So again, something brand new for me that I can actually sort of talk, hopefully direct to the reader, which is a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, and I think that flags up one of the things that I like about cozy mysteries are that they're very involving. You can't just sort of stand back, whether it's because it's first person or because of the detail, because of the relationship with the characters. You just get drawn in, and you do feel part of the mystery. You're there alongside the sleuth, aren't you? Solving, the reader is the sleuth as well. And I think that's been part of the fun from the very early days. Although I think cozy crime's probably a relatively recent term that we've all started using. It's really how it was with Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie, the golden age of detection writing. Ngaio Marsh, Dorothy L. Sayers. You've both mentioned Agatha Christie as being a favourite, one of your favourite cozy crime. I'd like to flag up Dorothy L. Sayers, who I've been reading since I was a teenager, and this is the very tatty ancient copy of my favourite edition of the Nine Tailors, and she also has wonderful settings. That one's set in the East Anglian fens, starts off during winter. It's terribly atmospheric, and I love Dorothy L. Sayers for the characters, for the settings. Each one's very different. They're all each one has a different setting, although they're a series, and there's also quite a lot of humour in there, quite a lot of wit and wry humour. I have a lot of humour in mine as well. I think that's part of the fun. Who else would you? Is there anyone else that you would flag up as being particularly fond of as cozy crime authors, or do you want to talk more about Agatha Christie?
Well, actually, I'm just mentioning this. There's a golden age of detective fiction, and Josephine Tey was one of my favourites.
Oh yes, yeah, lovely.
And I think she's a good example of cozy crime in that she sets up the novels, and the start is a very domestic scene. It's either showing the village or a house and the everyday life, and then she brings in the disruptive stranger.
Yes.
And so she's very good at foreshadowing, because she's got, say, the lawyer in his office and doing his normal duties that he would do as a village lawyer, and then suddenly, little does he know, all that's about to change, and the stranger comes into its midst, and everything's the peace of their lives is shattered. And, I particularly enjoy her novels, and I think she's very good at that type of.
I also, not so much actually from the reading point of view, but from the TV point of view, I do still like a good Midsummer Murder. I mean, I suppose that's probably your neck of the woods, Debbie, isn't it? But there's some of them are very far-fetched, and they have that annoying business of where the beauty with Agatha Christie, for example, is that everything's there. If you read through the book, every single clue is there, and you just don't happen to notice them. But Hercule Poirot does. Whereas some of the Midsummer Murders, I noticed that they just bring in this Deus Ex Machina thing right at the end. In comes this fact about the person that nobody knew about, and suddenly realise, well, it has to be them. That's cheating, I think.
That totally is cheating. Have you heard there's Detective Writers Club, Detective Fiction Club, from the Golden Age of Detective Writing, which had Agatha Christie and all of these people. They had some rules that were sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek, but one of the rules that they had was that you had to have all the clues. The reader should be able to have all the material there to solve the crime. And I think it's disappointing if they don't sometimes. But I mean, Midsummer Murder is hugely popular, and I think viewers and readers are willing to suspend a little bit of disbelief about some of the
and I think it goes back to what you were saying before about the surroundings. I think the backdrop to Midsummer Murders, just like in your books, and just like, in fact, from a time point of view in yours, Michelle, they are fascinating places, fascinating times, and that in itself, and hopefully Tuscany as well. They are, as you say, it almost becomes another character, really.
Yes. Is there a particular novel that is your all-time favourite cozy crime novel? Have you got a particular one?
I've got a series of series rather than a particular novel. I'm enjoying the Ellie Griffiths Brighton Mysteries. I think what she's done very well with this series is that she's combined the setting of Brighton, the nostalgia of the 1950s, and the characters. So you've got those three elements of character, setting, historical period that she's merged together very well. And it's I love the historical detail. It's very much around theatricals like Max Mephisto. She's got two protagonists. There's the quite serious detective, Edgar Stevens. Then she's got Max Mephisto, the magician, who's quite a more flamboyant, sophisticated character. And he takes you behind the scenes of the variety halls and seaside theatres of the 1950s. And she shows that history of that time when really variety was going out as television was coming in, and what it's like to be a performer knowing you're on the way out. And she blends that in very well in this whole backdrop to the mystery that she puts on top of that.
Oh, I'll have to give those a try.
Yeah, I think they're cleverly done.
Trevor, have you got a particular favourite novel?
Yes, it's difficult to say, really. And as I say, I'm reading my way through the whole Agatha Christie canon at the moment. And I came across one the other day which just struck a bit of a chord, and that was Dumb Witness. Is it Dumb Witness or Dumb Animal? Dumb Animal, I think it's called.
Oh, I don't know.
No, I don't know.
It's one of her quite early ones. I think it's 1937 or something like that. Dumb Witness, is it? Anyway, it's because when the woman is found dead, the only witness is a dog. And the book is actually dedicated to her wire-haired terrier, Peter. And it's because, you have animals in your books. Certainly with my Dan and Oscar the Labrador, it just struck a chord. Here's somebody with a dog in a book, and the dog, pretty much like Oscar in my books, he doesn't actually talk, but he's quite good at drawing people's attention to things if it comes to it.
Oh, I would have said for a long time I've been saying that The Nine Tailors is my favourite, but at Christmas I had this gorgeous set of secondhand, as Haynes to add, because it'd be cost a fortune. It's of Dorothy L. Sayers Folio Society books, and I've just been rereading Strong Poison, and it's got all these lovely illustrations and things. And actually, I think Strong Poison is now my favourite, where the detective hero amateur sleuth Lord Peter Wimsey meets his future wife, who is being tried for murder. And so he decides he wants to marry her, love at first sight, and so has to save her from the gallows. So Strong Poison is a wonderful read. Fancy trying Dorothy L. Sayers if they haven't done before. Now on to novels that we're writing. We've all got lots of characters in our books, lots of fun people for readers to get to know. Do you have, who's been your favourite character to write so far? Can you pick any out that, because we kind of assume that an author is going to most like writing about the central characters. I actually find, I love writing about my central characters, but where I have most fun is where minor characters creep in and actually start taking over and get themselves a regular gig in the stories, because they've just come up with some funny things. I had an old man in the first scene, I think the second chapter of the first book, who was only meant to be a customer in the tea shop making a sort of a wisecrack, and he ended up being quite a frequent character in the whole series. And I've got to know him more, built a backstory, and really loved him. He's Billy, and I loved writing about him. Who do you like writing about most?
Well,
Trevor, do you want?
If I go first, I mean, yes, I would have to say the dog, but you probably worked that out already. I love being able to almost to show people through the eyes of the dog what's going on. But in terms of minor characters, this one, the new book that's coming out in April, Murder in Florence. As I say, there's a Hollywood film crew who are busy filming in Florence. And there are some fairly weird characters there. I'm having a lot of fun with them. And one of the later books, which I'm still working on, which is going to be a group of ufologists. You come across ufologists, as in UFO fanatics. And this bunch of I've got some lovely weirdos in that one. So that's been quite fun. One guy who's completely shaved his head, and he's got it tattooed with, I think I describe him in the book as looking like a human Rosetta Stone, that he's basically just got these weird symbols all over his head. And his partner, his buddy, has got he's a 50-year-old man with a pigtail down his back, plaited, and also a pigtail coming down from his beard, which has a habit of ending up in his drink. So yeah, that kind of odd board, I quite enjoy a bit of that.
Michelle, who's been your favourite character to write so far?
A character called Percy Baverstock.
And I like Percy, yes.
Yeah, he was only supposed to play a minor role in the first book, and he's now a permanent character. He makes an appearance in Death at Crookham Hall because one of the women that's standing for an MP is involved in a scandal that involves a society called the Society for the Promotion of Nature Reserves. And this was a real life organisation that was the forerunners of the Wildlife Trust that we have today. And so back in the 1920s, this group had formed trying to get legal protection for sites of importance to wildlife, which were obviously just being taken, especially by railway companies, being developed and ruined. So that was the reason for Percy to come into the book. But he's such an easygoing character and very easy to write. He fought in the First World War, and he lost some great friends during that time. and he thinks it's his duty to live his life to the full in their honour.
Oh.
And he does that by going to lots of dance clubs and, drinking and generally having fun. He's very, fond of the new jazz music that's playing. He's very fond of dancing. He's quite an exuberant dancer. And so, he thinks it's his duty to go and dance with as many girls as possible and to have as much fun as he can. And he's quite a mercurial character because he comes across as quite daft and almost silly at times. But on the other hand, he can switch instantly for being quite serious and thoughtful. And, and he works in the Natural History Museum, and in the way that he's a city boy and he loves the hustle and bustle of London, the clubs. He's also got this love of nature and the countryside. So he's got some contradictions about him. And so Iris quickly realizes there's more to him than first meets the eye. He's just, she thinks, oh, he's a laugh, he's good company, but actually, he's quite sharp with it. And it's great fun. And especially he sort of says things before he thinks, so he's constantly putting his foot in it, and that's always fun to write, especially for someone who's not embarrassed at all. He puts his foot in it and then goes blithely on to the next faux pas he makes.
Oh, great. Well, I've enjoyed his company so far. I'm about halfway through Death at Crookham Hall at the moment. I'm glad to know that he's going to be an ongoing character. Terrific. Let's talk now about settings, shall we? As I've mentioned, my books are set. Well, I've got two series because today we're talking about my series set in the village of Wenderbury Barrow, the Sophie Sayers Cosy Mysteries. I've also got another series which is set in a girls' boarding school, St Bride's Gemma Lamb Cosy Mysteries, which happen to be the school happens to be just a couple of miles down the road from the village, so we get a little bit of crossover sometimes as well. I've chosen my settings because I know them very well. I think when you have a fixed community, that's very useful for plotting a cosy crime series. So the fixed community of the village, fixed community of the boarding school, with the odd stranger coming in and causing havoc, being the disruptor, as you said, Michelle, having the disruptor. And both of those communities, I really love. I worked at boarding school for 13 years. I've lived in the village for 32 years. I loved and wanted to celebrate both of those settings. And they're just great settings in practical terms for murders, although we haven't had any in the village or the school, I hasten to add, in real life. But that's why I've chosen those settings. Trevor, you said you lived in Italy for a long time. So is that the main reason that you chose Italy?
Yes, it's escapism. Escapism for me as well as for the reader, really. I was fortunate enough to live and work in Florence. At least I worked in Florence and lived outside. We rented an apartment in an 11th century convent, which had nothing. I mean, the only source of heat was a terracotta stove, wood burning, and it had a pipe that went up like that to the ceiling. And that was also made of terracotta. I mean, it was absolutely beautiful. It didn't heat the place at all. We used to have people would come round for meals and we'd be handing them pullovers as they came in. But yes, that whole area, I just love it. And it, as I say, it takes it back, particularly during, lockdown and all that kind of thing. Because I use that also for some of my romances are set in, most of them are set in Italy, some of them in Tuscany. And it just it takes it back.
Is this series all going to be set in the summer? Because I have to say I've been reading them through the winter and it's really warmed me up.
Yeah, I think so. It's difficult to know. I mean, the fifth one is actually going to be called Murder at the Matterhorn. And it takes place up in the Alps, as the name would imply. But a bit like, you were saying with your Scottish trip, it starts in Tuscany and it finishes in Tuscany.
Yeah.
The vast majority of it's this bunch of UFO freaks up in very serious people, I'm sure, up in the Alps near the Matterhorn. So, but yeah, the majority of the books, because he's now based, he's bought himself a house. Dan has bought himself a house outside Florence, and he's living in the hills, and it's all very familiar to me. And I just enjoy writing about what I remember.
Sounds idyllic. Michelle, you've got a dual setting, haven't you? Because you've got a lot happening around Westminster and London and around the Thames, and then a lot in around Waldenmere, which is it Hampshire?
It's
Hampshire.
North East Hampshire, and that's really where the novels are based, and that's where I live.
Oh, right, right.
And so what I wanted to do was create a fictional market town where all the action takes place, but it's firmly rooted in this area. So everything surrounding it, I mentioned the real life locations of Farnborough and Basingstoke and Odium and Aldershot. So it's firmly located in this area. But Walden and Waldenmere is based on Fleet and Fleet Pond.
Oh, right.
History.
So we're all writing what we know, really, aren't we, with those settings?
And
we
that's
know.
fun for locals because they pick up my books and they know what I'm talking about, especially when I'm writing about Waldenmere. Because if you know Fleet Pond, and Fleet Pond, it's a deceptive name. It's not a pond; it's the largest freshwater lake in Hampshire. So it's a big lake with lots of locations around it. Like the real life location is Sandy Bay, and in my book I call it Heron Bay. So I've just adapted the names around the pond, and that's just been good fun for local readers to say, "Oh, I know where she's talking about. I know where that is."
It lets them in on the secret. Lovely.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And so let's move on now to where do you get your ideas from? Because we have experience in these places, but we don't have experience of killing anyone, do we? So where do you dream up your ideas from? Trevor, do you want to?
Speaking personally, I mean, whether it's, in fact, to be honest, it's actually easier for the cozy crime than it is for the romances. People often say to me, where do you get your ideas from for the romances? My wife and I are the two most unromantic people you can imagine. I mean, we forget our wedding anniversaries. We don't give each other presents. I mean, it's remarkable. As for the cozy crime, yeah, I mean, you can get ideas from reading other books. And certainly just, reading, for example, my friend Agatha, I read my way through all of the Sherlock Holmes books. And to be absolutely honest, I was slightly disappointed. When you read them, if you like, maybe with a critical eye, you realize that, in fact, there's quite a lot there, there's some quite rude people. It's a bit like, mind you, Hercule Poirot can be pretty rude, can't he, to poor old Hastings. But it didn't quite do it for me. So I think, yes, you get some ideas from books you read, some ideas from things on the TV, and the news, actually, on the TV. Just as an example, I don't know if you remember, about 2 months ago, there was a horrible mass shooting. It was Chinese New Year over in the US. And a man went crazy with a gun and he shot some people. And then he was found later shot. He went in wearing a mask, but he was obviously of Chinese extraction. He was found dead at the seat of a van with his mask still on, and he'd shot himself, supposedly. But what if it was a different man? What if the person you wanted to get rid of somebody in a bad way, and preferably to damn his whole family for life, you go out and kill a few people, then you get him, stick him in a van, kill him, make it look as if he's committed suicide, and suddenly you've killed 3 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah. I have to say, I think the news is a great place to find stories. And I don't read a newspaper every day, but I always look at the BBC News app on my phone and get the headlines. And if I see a story on there that sounds like a starting point for a mystery, then I'll email the link to my inbox so that I can come back to it later and develop it as a story. And people, sort of aspiring writers, who say, "Oh, I can't think of any ideas. I've run out of ideas." I thought, just read a newspaper. There's so much goes on that there's no excuse, really. There's no end of stories. And with the writer's habit, you can't help but invent the backstory, can you? When you read a story like that, like you've just demonstrated, Trevor, that's exactly what we do. So, Michelle, where do your ideas come from?
Really what you've just said about news, but obviously mine taking place 100 years ago. And I've got this wonderful book which actually lists lots of events that take place in a year, social events, political events.
That's good.
And that's a really good starting point. And I knew I wanted to start this in the 1920s. And then I was looking at female members of the parliament, and there was only 2. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll create the 3rd. And then that led me to think, oh, okay, well, it'd be interesting if she was actually competing against another woman in a by-election, because that hadn't happened at that stage.
Yeah.
So that's one strand. Then I was thinking about suffragettes and how they disbanded in the war, but I wanted this to be a kind of a new generation that carried on from the suffragettes. And I'm thinking, well, what if, her mother died in a suffragette protest and she's investigating it, and that's sort of her first real crime that she investigates as a sort of amateur sleuth.
Mm.
So then we've got Crookham Hall, and at that time, a lot of stately homes were being sold.
Yes.
Across the country, taxes and everything else. The aristocracy, landowners, they just couldn't afford these places anymore, and so they were slowly disappearing. And that led me to think, okay, well, I've got a member of the aristocracy, and he's got the stately home, but he can't really afford it. And so, in a sense, I had kind of three threads that I was then combining.
Mm.
Right, how's this going to weave together?
Yeah, great fun. Fun. We've got a question from Judy Lee. Hello, Judy, saying, do we find plotting a cosy crime is mathematical and logical, or is it buoyed by whimsy, detailed imagination, detailed plotting, or a little spontaneity?
Oh, combination.
If I could start off with an answer to that one. There are, as I understand it, there are two types of writer. There's the plotter and there's the pantser. The pantser is by the seat of the pants, and I would certainly classify myself as one of those. I start, particularly with the romances, I start off with a character, the name of the dog, I always have the name of the dog, a location, and let's just see what happens. With a crime novel, I've been finding it's a little bit more difficult, because theoretically, when you're writing the book, you should know before you start who has actually done it. But in all three of these first three, I actually surprised myself, or the book surprised me. Do you find that? Do you find that after a while, if you're lucky, the book sort of takes over and it leads you in directions that you weren't really expecting?
Yeah.
I plan quite meticulously, but I have maybe a paragraph per chapter to start with. So I'll plan pretty much, and the more books I've written, because I'm now on the 12th, 13th, the more books I've written, the more I've planned, strangely. But I do also, so I always know what's going to happen, but things crop up that surprise me, and I delight in suddenly red herrings suddenly coming to mind that I can throw in along the way. So although I plot, I will allow my imagination, sort of subconscious, to change things as well. So I think I have occasionally changed whodunit as well. How about you, Michelle?
Yeah. I'm a plotter, but I also change things along the way. So I would say detailed plotting and spontaneity can go together. And so I do like to know pretty much where I'm heading, but I can change things. And changing the sex of a character is a good way to it's a bit stereotyping a character. And that's how I came to actually have two women competing against each other, because I felt the male character that I had originally written was too much of a stereotype of what you'd consider to be this very affluent conservative MP. And then I thought, hang on, let's make her a woman. Oh, that changes everything.
Yeah, especially in that era. Terrific.
Yes, absolutely. And that added a whole new twist to it.
Yeah.
I like to have something, a framework in my mind to begin with, but I'm very open to changing it as it goes along. And as Trevor said, things start taking over then.
Yeah.
You've got a character and think, oh, I know this, especially with Percy. He wasn't supposed to be, he just played a minor part that was, taking a plot in a certain direction and solving something for her. But he just became so enjoyable, and I filled out his character so much, that changed that storyline a little bit as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's important to be, because I would never plan something completely and then refuse to change it, because I think that would actually become quite boring as well. It'd be a bit like doing homework or something. It's nice to be able to enjoy the ride as well at the same time and let more things come in along the way. We've also got a question from Lisa Lane, hello Lisa, saying, what is your writing routine? Required place to work, food and drink, writing tools. Yes, we all need fuel. That's a good point. I'm a bit unusual, I think, in that I am very old-fashioned in that I write by hand with pen and ink, with a fountain pen. I know I'm a bit old school, but I have written books by typing straight onto the computer. I've written by dictating, but I've just settled down into writing by the first draft, and I like to write the first draft. As soon as I've got the plot ready, then I will write the first draft without really editing or stopping, and then I'll go back and examine it and edit hugely. I'll spend a lot of time fine-tuning it. But I'm very lucky in that I've got a desk, I've got a study in my house, and I've also, thanks to a lockdown project by my husband, I've got a little, what I call my plotting shed in the garden, so I can go and write out there as well. But actually, I can write anywhere where I've got my notebook. Coffee, tea. I drink tea and coffee all day, probably far too much. How about you, Michelle? What's your routine?
I work full time, and it's quite difficult to fit the writing in. So yeah, I'm at my desk and I'm doing the day job as well as suddenly scribbling down notes for ideas, and then evenings, weekends, really spending more time then to actually do what I really want to do and flesh them out. It's quite a juggling act, I must admit. It's difficult to work full time and to write the novels.
Gosh, I'm sure. For years, I had a full-time job, and I used to write in the evenings for relaxation, really. But now that I'm, have the time to be able to write, I have a fairly standard routine in that I, bit like you, Debbie, that I like to write always in the same place. So I'm sitting at my desk now, which I've now invested because I'm really old and I've got bad back. One of these, you turn a handle and the desk will come up, and so I can stand at the desk.
That's good. Yeah, I like standing.
And that's quite good because you can, straighten yourself up, and you can then lower it. And in terms of fuel, I'm a bit like you. I was drinking far too much tea actually, and so I started drinking decaf tea. I don't know if it makes much difference, but at least because I have to get up every 45 minutes and just walk around, otherwise my back sets solid. I inevitably find myself walking towards the kitchen, put the kettle on, help myself to a chocolate hobnob, and before you know, you've eaten far too much and drunk far too much. So yes, decaf, I think, is the way to
go. Let's see if we've got other questions. Can't see any at the minute, but the final question that I was going to ask is, would you be a good detective? If you were a detective, would you be able to solve the crime? We're good at making other people do it.
Yes.
About how would you be? What do you reckon, Michelle? Would you
writing make you more observant? I always think writing the murder is the easy bit. You have a murder and write it. The difficult bit is writing the clues and writing how the murder is solved. And that's the difficulty, as we were saying earlier. You don't want to cheat the reader. You want to give them the information. You don't want to give the plot away. You don't want to give the answer away, but you do want to be fair to the reader and give them the clues as you go along. Because to me, that's the fun. That's the game in it, that they can go along with you.
Yes.
That's the really difficult bit, because you're thinking, okay, how is, in my case, Iris Woodmore, how is she going to solve this mystery? And, I've got to give her clues, and that could be items left at the scene of the crime, overheard conversations, letters found, photographs, all that sort of thing. So I think, now my brain's more engaged in how to do that. I think that would be a better detective. I'm not saying I'd solve the crime.
You've apprenticeship.
Yeah, a certain insight, perhaps.
How about you, Trevor? Would you be a good sleuth?
Yeah, I don't think I would really. I mean, I quite like sticking my nose into other people's business, don't we all? But I think my main problem nowadays is my memory, and particularly my memory for names. And I find that even just if I'm reading an Agatha Christie or something, you find something, who is Philip, what's his name? And you have to go back and check. No, I mean, before long, I'll have a little bracelet here saying, if found, please. So no, I don't think I would give up the day job to be a policeman. It wouldn't be a good move.
I have to say, I would hate to have to rely on detective skills as a career, as an earner, as an income. But I think actually I'd make quite a good detective because I'm very observant and I've got very good memory for things that I don't need to remember. I always have to park in the same place at the supermarket so I can remember where I brought my car. But I can remember conversations and snippets of things that would make a good story from literally decades ago. And I'm quite good at observing things, relationships and spotting secret relationships and things like that, just to get the neighbours worried. But I think I would be quite good at that sort of thing. Whether I would be methodical enough to stick to it and see a puzzling mystery through to the end, I don't know. But I do like a challenge. I like that kind of challenge. I can't see. I don't think we've got any. Oh, here we go. Another question from some lovely comments coming in here. Lisa, that's a good one. How close are your own personalities to those of your sleuth?
Ooh.
Well, I had to. I'll start with this one. Sophie Sayers is less than half my age, but when my old school friend Suzanne started reading her books, she said, "Sophie's you, isn't she?" She's a bit ditzy. I thought, oh, thanks, but I hadn't really thought that before. And certainly elements because I have quite a lot of observational humour, and so there are certain elements, I suppose. I'm not so sure about in the St Bride series, but yeah. So to that extent, I would say perhaps I'm similar to Sophie. How about you, Michelle? Are you like Iris?
I don't think so, but there is a little bit of me in her, but then I think there's a sprinkle of me in lots of the recurring characters. Iris is very young. She's only 20 when the series starts, and there's some quite older characters around her. And so I can definitely hear my voice coming out in a few different scenes in the characters. But I wouldn't say any of them, are particularly like me at all.
How about you, Trevor?
Well, I think because I'm now writing in the first person, and as I say, for the first time in 10 years, I'm writing as a man rather than trying to think myself into the head of a woman. A very dangerous thing to do. I actually do sometimes. My daughter, who reads my stuff, she's always been, well, since I started writing these, she's been coming back to me and saying, oh, I could hear you saying that, hear you doing that. So I suppose there's an element of it. Although the one that I liked best was the guy who does the narration for these books. He was in touch with me asking about the pronunciation of a few Italian words, things like that. And he does a great job, really great job. Simon Maddox, wonderful representation of, in my mind, just what my main character should sound like. And I said, oh, I wonder if it ever got made into a TV serial. I can just see you as Dan strolling around Tuscany with a dog. And he came back to me and said, I might be in with a shout for the dog's part, but not for anything else.
Oh, what fun. Oh. Well, I think we're just about done with all of the questions and from everybody else's contributions. We've got some lovely comments on there that we can catch up with afterwards. And I'm sure that if anybody thinks of any more questions they'd like to ask us when we're finished, I'm sure we'd all be happy to reply if you contact us via our social media or websites or whatever. And thank you very much for coming along tonight. And it's been a great pleasure to talk to Trevor and to Michelle about your story.
Likewise. Really nice to meet you too. Super.
Yes.
So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.